welcome, lady.
Good morning.
All right. I broke my ankles.
Morning, folks.
Is going to put your courage to the test. You can count on this. Every time a leader attempts to move people from here to there, the leader knows deep down in their heart that a certain percentage of the people are going to resist moving. They're going to say, I don't care how cool the vision is, how many people it helps, I'm not going. The leader knows that another group of people are going to have a wait-and-see attitude, and they're going to need persuasion over time. And every leader knows how ugly it would be to move an effort, a cause, or a group of people halfway and then not be able to finish the job. And so that paralyzes a lot of leaders with fear. Every vision tests the mettle of every leader, of every senior pastor and CEO gathered here all around the world. Ready for your day to be wrecked? In the first meeting with our culture consultant, the guy looked at me square in the eye and he asked me whose job it was to drive the improvements that we wanted to see in our culture. There were only two of us sitting on the other side of the table from him, myself and the one strong voice. Are you ready? We're going to say be strong and courageous. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. God will be with you and will not forsake you. Let's say it one more time. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. For I am with you and will never forsake you. Now stay standing, and we're going to seal this moment with a
This stage and this summit and this place has been to me. And so it is wonderful to be back, and it has been as well a huge blessing to have earned Bill Hybels' trust and the trust of his senior team, and to be able to engage with them now on a journey as they move forward to help Bill finish strong and to plan the strategy for Willow for many years and decades to come. I don't know about you, but unlike Bill perhaps, I sometimes get a little confused between the whisperings of the Holy Spirit and me just talking to myself. But in this particular case, having advised business and government, in this particular case, I truly believe that God is calling me to be of service to churches and NGOs. And so I look forward to doing more of that work, and I am blessed to be able to do some of that work here at Willow Creek with Bill and his team. You know him as a warrior, a general, a statesman, a philanthropist. I am very honored also to know him as a friend. And as a friend, I have seen a man who is singularly unimpressed by title or position It's not that he does not respect people of accomplishment and title and position. Of course he does, but he sees them as people. It's actually quite rare for someone who has achieved as much as Colin Powell has to be able to see people for who they are and not to be confused by their title, their position, the number of stars they have on their shoulder. But because Colin Powell sees people for who they are and respects people for who they are, not for what their title is, he treats everyone the same, as far as I can tell. I have been with him in many settings. I have been with him in many parts of the world, and he treats everyone the same way. He is also a man of great empathy. You know, when you see people for who they are, when you've had hard times yourself, you can empathize. You can feel some of what they are feeling. And this empathy and this ability to see people for who they are, I think, is what makes Colin Powell such an exceptional leader. He is also a man of uncommon common sense. You know, the old saying, common sense ain't so common. He has it. He has wisdom as well. And this empathy, this wisdom, this common sense, this leadership ability comes through loud and clear in his latest book. It worked for me. It's a wonderful book. And so it is a great honor for me to introduce to you a great warrior, yes, a great general, a great statesman, a great leader, a wonderful friend of mine, but most of all, perhaps, the highest compliment I think we can give. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Colin Powell, a very good man.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for that warm welcome, and I thank my dear friend Carly Fiorina for that fabulous introduction. So glad she didn't go into all that resume stuff. I'm deeply touched that she would just focus on the human aspects of my life and the human aspects of the relationship that I've had with her. And I'm so deeply honored to be back with the Willow Creek family and with Pastor Bill, and to have shared in his witness and testimony earlier this morning by watching it on the screen and copiously taking notes. And I'm so pleased to be able to talk to so many fellow Christians and other of my fellow citizens around the world who will be seeing this while we are broadcasting it now, and also be seeing it for months to come. And I remember vividly when I did a tape presentation some 5 or 6 years ago for Willow Creek. So deeply impressed by what Willow Creek is doing under Pastor Bill and the staff's leadership. And not only what you're doing here in this community, but how what you are doing is spreading throughout the world and touching hearts and minds throughout the world. So it's a great pleasure for me to be with you. Now, I've only got a few minutes, so I've got to be very, very to the point. Carly said that, I haven't changed that much. I'm kind of the same way with everybody, and that's pretty much because it's the way I was raised. I was raised in an immigrant family, a very loving immigrant family. I went to the public school system of New York City. I was not a great student. I was just another kid trying to make it. And I worked hard at it. And I was able to get an education through this public school system without my parents paying anything for it, because the city of New York said a state has nothing more important to do in the world than educate the next generation of youngsters, so pay whatever it costs, whatever it takes to educate our young people. And that simply, in my own view, leadership is getting more out of people than the science of management says you can. You get leadership that takes you above the science of management by having a vision. By having a vision that goes towards a purpose, and Bill talked about that. You get that by believing in yourself, by having the courage of your convictions. You get that by inspiring people. Leaders inspire people to reach beyond themselves. I started to learn all of this when I was a brand new second lieutenant, 21 years old, coming out of the South Bronx, and they sent me to the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, to get my basic training. When you drive around the post at Fort Benning, you see the motto of the infantry school, and it says, "Follow me." And so it was drilled into me then, and I've never forgotten, is that even though I'm a leader, I'm not the one getting the work done.
Speaker cancel at the very last moment. We called Patrick at the 11th hour and 59th minute. He agreed to come with almost no preparation time to fill in for that speaker. The evaluation of that session went through the roof. I personally felt that he benefited from a sympathy vote. We already had him scheduled to come back, which would have been last year, and he spoke last year, and his evaluation was unbelievable. And we paid a bit of attention to those kinds of things. So as we were praying about who to invite to our faculty for 2013, the summit team felt we owed it to Patrick to give him a year off. Let him rest up, let him write another best-selling book, maybe have another kid. He's got 4 of them already, so maybe he's under-challenged and needed to do that. My thought was exactly the opposite. I said, let's see if he can do a hat trick. Let's see if he can come back and just have a fantastic talk again. In fact, let's keep having him come every year until he bombs. And then we'll rest him up and let him write another book and have another kid. But he's back, and we're glad he's back. Please welcome Patrick Lencioni.
Well, this is the year I bombed, so let's get ready for that. Yeah, 10 years ago this month, I was here at Willow Creek for the first time, and I remember my wife came and we were like blown away, and I thought, well, I'll never get to do that again. And so it's always a treat to come back. I see people I know, I get distracted. I'm not going to do the old look a bird thing this year, though, you know. And so I'm very excited to be here. It's great to be here for Jimmy's last summit, too. That's very special. I'm also really excited to give this particular talk, which I've not done here, and I don't give very often. It's probably my favorite talk. But before I get into that, I do need to do my confession, because I'm an evangelical Catholic here, you know. And I do need to confess that, as I said before, everything I cover is really simple. You know that if you've read my books or heard me speak, and I know that. And I'm okay with that. But this book and this material I'm going to talk about today of how to lose your best people, this is really, really simple. It's probably the simplest talk or the simplest book I have. And I just want to let you know that, because there's no rocket science here. You already know this stuff. It's just going to be a reminder. As General Powell said, that's what our job as reminders are. I like to say when you're a leader, you're a CRO, Chief Reminding Officer, more than anything else.
Like Patrick, I was imagining them describing metal signs with pigs on them, and I'm sure that was a challenge. So thank you. Your pay should be doubled today. I also want to thank Carly Fiorina for her investment, both here at Willow Creek, but her willingness to invest in other churches. And we're not sure you got her website, so I want to put that up for you to check out what she's doing and open to doing to serve churches and other organizations. If you haven't done so yet, please download the Global Leadership app and take a poll for us before Liz Wiseman's talk in session 3. We have a couple questions we'd love for you to answer.
The book you wrote was phenomenal, changed lives. I just want to say publicly, thank you for writing The Purpose-Driven Life. I really appreciate that. It's a great book. It's phenomenal stuff, man. This is so cool, man. We were laughing at church. Now listen, I perform all over. I've been on all the late night TV shows. I perform on Sunday morning at churches all over, which is amazing to me, because when I was a kid, laughing at church was illegal. I remember one time laughing at church, one time, right? My grandmother, her friend was jumping around and her wig fell off. And I laughed, and my grandmother would pinch and twist. I can understand a pinch. You gonna twist? That's the devil.
Well, we're going to turn the corner now and hear from a very insightful leader, best-selling author and executive advisor Liz Wiseman. As president of the Wiseman Group, Liz is all about leadership development and coaching top executives. Some of her clients include household names like Apple, Nike, PayPal, and Twitter. A former long-term executive at Oracle, she was tapped at a very young age to head up Oracle University, their leadership development arm, and then eventually was tapped on the shoulder to lead all of Oracle human resource development globally. Today, Liz will be speaking out of her book, Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everybody Smarter. It was at Oracle where she first observed two types of leaders. The first are what she calls diminishers. The second are leaders who get the best smarts and talent out of their team. She calls them multipliers. As we prepare to dive into Liz's message, take a look at this video that'll set up her topic, and then right after that, please give her a warm summit welcome.
Thank you. It is so amazing. It's thrilling to be part of this incredible Christian community and to be part of an organization that's dedicated to strengthening leadership in the workplace, in our churches, in our communities, and in our home. And I just can't tell you how excited I am to share with you my research and my work behind multipliers that began with this very, very small observation. And as Jim mentioned, at my time at Oracle, where I could see that there was more intelligence inside of our organization than we could see with the naked eye. You know, there's more intelligence in our work teams, in our management teams, in our churches than we can see, and there's more intelligence than we are putting to use. You know, we have latent, unused intelligence all around us. And the idea behind multipliers, Jim did such a nice job describing it, is such a very simple idea. It's, as the leader, you can be a multiplier, and what that means is you use your intelligence, your God-given intelligence, your knowledge, your skill, your talent, your capability, your technical skills. You use that intelligence to amplify, to magnify, to multiply the capability of people around you.
Growing the midweek Bible study at Azusa Pacific College from 80 to 1,500 students, Chris Brown's beginnings in ministry demonstrated his gifts as an outstanding leader and teacher. Today, he is one of 4 senior pastors at North Coast Church, a thriving multi-site ministry whose anchor campus in Vista, California is comprised of 9,000 weekly attendees across 25 services. Chris shares teaching responsibilities with founding and senior pastor Larry Osborne. Chris has developed a unique teaching style that has become his calling card. Today, Chris will bring to life a leadership principle taken straight from the pages of Scripture, illustrating biblical leadership in a new, fresh way. Let's welcome Chris Brown to the summit stage.
Even in the absolute darkest part of the night, he could tell every eye was staring on him. It was the third campfire that he had gone to that night. And he knew he needed sleep. His body craved it. But he also knew his mind wouldn't shut off. So once again, he's walked to the darkness, and the flames have drawn him closer. And on this campfire, the exact same consequences as the first two. As soon as he approached, the little yellow and orange of the flames lit up his face where they could see who it was. All conversation stopped. He would stand in the awkward silence till it was almost unbearable. He'd warm his hands as if that was the reason he was there. And he would turn and walk back into the shadows. The conversation would pick up again. And he knew what they knew. And no one had to say a word. Every man in his company was questioning his leadership. And he knew he didn't have what it took. And he knew it was all on the line. And he felt the weight of the responsibility fall squarely on his shoulders. It's been over a month now. A month where every morning he's being called out. A month in that small little horseshoe-shaped valley of Allah. A month right now below that hill of Azekah. A month where they put their giants out in the center. And with that huge voice in that small valley, he bellows, "Bring me a man! Your best! One-on-one! Winner takes all!" And it sends shivers up his spine. And his men know it. I didn't get it in the story. When I was just a little boy and they told me the story of David and Goliath, I never saw it through the eyes of the leader, the king, Saul. I never picked up in chapter 9, verse 2, and then again in chapter 10 of 1 Samuel. It has said clearly, when Israel wanted a king, when they wanted to be like the rest of the world, when God made it clear, no, I'm your God, you follow me, spiritual leadership will always be different than secular leadership. And Israel says, oh, we get it. Now give us a king. And it's the exact same thing we wrestle with today in all of our lives as leaders. And God gave in. And twice in chapter 9 and 10, it simply says, he was head and shoulders above the rest. He was without equal among the men of Israel. And when the little blue-haired lady in my Sunday school class when I was in first grade taught it to me on the tiny felt board, it never dawned on me that for over a month now, Saul is being called out and everyone knows it. The enemy has put their biggest and best in the middle of the field. And Saul's made clear, when God says you're the biggest, you're the biggest. He's being called out and he knows he doesn't have what it takes. And his ministry is paralyzed. His leadership is paralyzed. And he knows it. And his company knows it. Did it ever dawn on you why they would send a shepherd boy out with a sling? Did it ever dawn on you who in their right mind would look at that and go, that's a good idea? You're going up against the heavyweight champion of the world, undefeated. He's got the belt on in the middle of the field. Let's send the boy. Why? Because after 40 days when your leadership is being questioned, after 40 days when you can't sleep at night, after 40 days of knowing this organization, this company is not going forward, and it's because of you, and you hear rumor through the ranks, somebody's asking about their award. Someone wants to know what's on the line. Someone now says they have what it takes. Sure, you're surprised when the lad comes forward. But at this point, any neck is better than yours. Hopefully most of you...
that you might not know. For many people, I would imagine, speaking at the summit would be the biggest event of their week. Speaking at the summit is nowhere near the biggest event of Bob's week because on Sunday, Bob's only daughter, Lindsay, got married to a wonderful guy named John at their family's home in Canada. So we are so happy for your family and for Lindsay and John. It seems to me that if you love a book, you always want to know if that person is as great in real life as the person you discover on the page. And in the same way, when you hear a speaker, you always wonder if the person you would encounter off stage is as good as the person on stage. This is the thing about Bob Goff. When you read his book, when you hear him speak, you encounter this incredibly compelling, interesting, huge-hearted, fun-loving lawyer of all things. And you think this has got to be a fictional character. No one is really like this. I've had the wonderful opportunity to spend some time with Bob and with his family, and I have to tell you, the person that you've read about is just a tiny glimpse of the truly extraordinary person that Bob is. I have rarely in my life spent time with a person so present, so committed to love, to fun, to memory making. I've rarely in my life encountered such a deep sense of hospitality, of grace, of a true pastor's heart. In Liz Wiseman's word, Bob is a true multiplier. Every Christian wants to be like Christ. And along the way, it's helpful to have people in your life who show you what that looks like in modern, human, day-to-day terms. Bob Goff does that for me. I want to be like Christ. And I think that being more like Bob would be a really good start. So please welcome with me my dear friend, Bob Goff.
Hey, wow, I'm emotionally incontinent, so that's a tough stuff. I'm crying, which is really a problem if you're a lawyer. You're like, yeah, hang on a second. So yes, I'm a recovering lawyer. My name is Bob.
Mark Burnett stands as one of today's most celebrated television producers. Credited with the beginnings of reality television, Mark's work has revolutionized TV as we know it. But he is a man of humble origins. Born in London as the son of automobile factory workers, his knock-the-doors-down style has earned him the reputation for making things work in the middle of complex, uncertain situations. He has built world-class teams, financed million-dollar budgets, overseen the communication of compelling storylines, and consistently produced some of the most popular content on television. Celebrity Apprentice, Shark Tank, The Voice, and Survivor are leading examples of unscripted dramas that he conceived. Named one of Time Magazine's most influential people in the world today, his most recent project, the 10-hour docudrama, The Bible, has become the #1 news series on cable TV in 2013. Give a warm welcome to Mark Burnett.
Yeah, it's an absolute delight for me to be able to introduce Mark Burnett to all of you. I got to know Mark over the course of this last year. We'll get into that in just a moment in the interview. But this is one exceptional human being. And it's the dream of millions of people to be able to produce a television show that would be rated highly. Mark has had 4 #1 rated television shows in their time slot at the same time. This is like never happened in television history before. And in addition to that, then he takes his Christian faith very seriously, gets a tap on the shoulder, and he and his wife, Roma, like bet the farm, all of their Hollywood success, a good portion of money, and they do this series on the Bible. And most of you probably saw it. 100 million people tuned in to that show. So anyway, some of you here at Willow Creek know that I have a bias in my ministry. I think it's because of the effect that my father had on me. My father was a business person. He wasn't a pastor. He didn't quite ever understand pastors very well. But he was a Christian, and he was always trying to figure out how he could make a difference in his business, or through his business, through his influence, for things that really matter. And at Willow, something that I've tried to do all throughout the years is I've tried to remind people in business, or whatever their vocation is, you don't have to be a pastor to make a difference. You can make a difference where you are. You can take the skills, the talents, the abilities, the influence that you have, and you can do something extraordinary right where you are. And this is what Mark Burnett is in the middle of doing right now. So again, Mark, thanks for coming. And I want to ask you a couple of questions that I put together, but also these are some questions that have come in via the Twitter feed. And let's go back to the beginning. We'll cover this very quickly. Your business in the U.S. started by selling T-shirts on the beach. Literally, you did this.
Absolutely. I came here with nothing, and I quickly realized what a serious land of opportunity this is. In Europe, if you don't speak the right way, didn't go to the right school, have the right parental background of probably wealth, doors are closed. In America, no door is closed. And I got some great advice from a wealthy American businessman. start a business that's the lowest cost entry. So I started buying $2 slightly damaged t-shirts from a factory in downtown Los Angeles and sold them on the beach for $18. And great value, because in the shops in Nordstrom they were 36, and you couldn't see there was nothing really wrong with them. And realized that Americans will give you a chance. You know, this is a place where anybody can actually have an idea, but you have to take action. You have to take some action. And yes, I did start off on the beach, Venice Beach, selling t-shirts.
Yes. Don't record.
A sought-after speaker having delivered thousands of speeches, co-founder of Vital Smarts, a recognized leader in the world of business consulting, his most recent book, Influencer, shows us that influence isn't necessarily something you're born with. It can be learned. Please welcome Joseph Granny.
Good morning, or afternoon or evening, depending upon when you're watching this. It's just a thrill to be with you. There's not a group in the world that I'd rather try to contribute to the influence of than the people assembled here and participating wherever you may be. Leadership is intentional influence. Yesterday, Bill described how leadership means getting people from A to B. Well, that can't happen unless people change their behavior. Here's the problem. So often we think about leadership just as a motivational aspect. In fact, it's far more than that. Our ability to be effective as leaders isn't just about motivating, it's also about us acquiring competence to do so. Courage is an important component, as Bill described yesterday. Inspiration and vision are essential. But unless that translates to changed behavior, we fail. So what you and I need to be doing if we want to be effective leaders is studying from those who understand influence. Let's take a look at a few. If you want to understand influence, you need to understand how things like this are happening. So human beings spend 3 billion hours playing online games every week. Why? Because whoever's designing those games understands influence. And unless you and I unpack what it is about that activity that is engaging people to the tune of 3 billion hours per week, we won't be able to do our jobs well. Second example, 7 million people in the United States, 1 in 34, are incarcerated or under the supervision of the correctional system. Why? Because influence systems are driving that behavior. We are locking more people up today, far more people up today than we did 50 years ago, because people are different. It's because the influence environment you and I inhabit has changed profoundly. And unless you and I understand how it's changed and learn to use that in favor of people's positive change, we won't be true leaders. Worldwide obesity, as we know, has doubled since 1980. Now, why are people eating differently? That's a behavior, that's an action. Leadership is intentional influence. And those who want us to eat more, who have economic incentives to do that, have developed wonderful strategies to help this to occur. Well, on a more positive note, smoking rates, at least in the United States, have dropped from 44% to 21% since 2008. Why? That's because there are people who understand influence. If you can cut smoking in half, there must be something for you and I to learn as influencers embedded in that wonderful outcome. So here's the deal. We know how to get people to log in, lock up, eat up, but not light up. We figured out how to do that. And so you and I ought to be taking lessons from this important field of social science, because after all, leadership is intentional influence. Some Americans said religion is losing influence. Well, if we're moving to video games and out of church pews, there's a reason for that. And you and I ought to understand the mechanics of that. 80% of people say, I know a Christian, and yet only 15% say they behave differently. Now, we can have lots of doctrinal discussions, and many of you are the experts on that, but from a social science perspective, I would say if our religious experience isn't translating to different habits and behaviors, then we aren't leaders. We haven't influenced. So what can we learn about influence? I want to take you on a journey through the social sciences. I'm going to try to...
Fosbury Flop completely innovated the high jump style. This is the central challenge, Jim. We have to improve the efficiency of our scissors today, but also we need to do some experiments today to transform the scissors into a Fosbury Flop.
Let's talk about let's get a deeper layer down in terms of the conflict between the scissors and the Fosbury Flop, ongoing operations and thinking about the future. You really talk about how these things are at odds. It's almost like the innovation is a virus to ongoing operations. So the question is, I think normal thinking would just say, well, let's just embed innovation in our ongoing operations and we'll end up with the Fosbury Flop. You take a different stance on that.
You see, when you are outstanding in scissors, what happens is a dominant logic develops inside the organization. And by dominant logic, what I mean is the kind of people you recruit, the kind of processes you have, the kind of performance measures you have, the kind of organization you have. That's what I mean by dominant logic. And dominant logic is a double-edged sword. Dominant logic is extremely useful in continued execution of your scissors. But left unchecked, the dominant logic creates the self-imposed boundaries. You cannot see new customers. You cannot see new possibilities. Therefore, the central leadership challenge, certainly church is a 2,000-year-old organization, and we have enjoyed enormous success. Our scissors has really hummed for a long time. But the key is, how do you preserve the dominant logic, which is still useful, but at the same time overcome it? That is the central challenge.
She became a mother. And I think you heard it. I think you heard a mother singing to a daughter. So We are so thankful for you. These are what we call no mascara days. So hi Kleenex morning. I am so happy to introduce Brene Brown to you. Every couple years, I get excited about someone, and I think this summit just absolutely needs their voice. So what I do is I just play it cool. I send my dad like no more than 6 emails a day about it. I send a few to Jimmy like every 10 minutes, just in a low-key way. If I run into someone who works at the WCA, whatever they say to me, like hello or how are you, I reply with, you know, that reminds me of how I think Brene Brown should come speak at the summit. I just reply that way to everything. So over time, I wore them down with a constant, unrelenting barrage of messages. So today, Brene Brown is here, 99.99% because she's awesome. And 0.01% because I annoyed this into being. And I feel great about that. This is why I feel great about that. There have been very few voices in the last couple years that have affected my thinking about leadership, about courage, and about honesty more than Brene Brown. I first encountered Brene through her TED Talk, which I'm sure many of you have seen, and then I read all of her books, which are great. The way that she talks about vulnerability and courage, especially for leaders, is a total game changer. So many of us were taught that leadership is about power and it's about strength. What an amazing thing to reframe leadership as the courage to be vulnerable. Her writing and her speaking, particularly on the topic of criticism, has been really helpful for me. I'm a writer, and so I don't know if you've ever seen an Amazon review, but yeah, welcome to my life. And I know that pastors never receive painful public criticism, but I think for the rest of us, her perspective might be really helpful. Our paths crossed a little bit in the past year, and she has been a friend and an encourager and a huge support to me as a fellow writer. And she is as warm and insightful and courageous when you're sitting across the table from her as she is in her research and in her writing. I am so thankful for her, and I'm so honored today to get to learn from her. So please welcome with me my friend, Dr. Brene Brown.
Hi, everybody. Oh, that's a nice group. Hi, everybody. Awesome. So I'm going to start with this story. A couple of years ago, I was doing a talk in Florida, and it was being translated into American Sign Language. It was being signed as I was speaking. And so right before I went up on stage, a couple of translators ran over to me and said, are there any words, kind of weird words, or words that you're going to use all the time that we may not be familiar with, something that we need to know? And I said, well, I'm a vulnerability researcher. And they kind of huddled for a minute and they said, we've got a sign for that. And I said, great. And I said, what's the sign? She held out her hand and she went, this is the sign. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, weak in the knees. And I was like, oh. That's not the sign I'm looking for. Is there another sign? And they huddled again, and they came back a couple minutes later, and they said, there's only one other sign. And I said, okay, hit me, what is it? And they said, it's this. That's the one I'm looking for. But I'm going to tell you the truth. Every time I go like this, I feel a little bit like this. And so the irony of me talking to you about leadership, let me tell you where this story starts. I'll start with a little truth telling. was about 6 years there. And the irony is that I spend 90% of my time when I'm traveling is working with leaders, CEOs, leadership teams around vulnerability and my work. I study vulnerability, courage, worthiness, and shame. But I didn't start that way. I got invited to do an event. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I love the people putting on the event, so I said, sure. I didn't give any thought to it. You know, one of those things where you think, well, that's like a year from now. I'll be in a better mood, I'll be thinner, I'll be happier, and it'll be great then. So
60 years to give the same sort of time that Jesus did. You don't have 60 years to spend with a young leader. And so you need to ensure that as every opportunity comes your way, you never do ministry alone. You always have budding leaders around you. You should never ever be alone. To be alone is to waste an opportunity to mentor a young leader. Take them with you into your meetings. Let them be the fly on the wall. Never drive alone. Never visit your congregation alone. Have them with you in your home. Immerse them in leadership opportunities. If you have a spare bedroom, I met going 10 years ago. And for 10 years we have ministered together. He went out and he planted a church. He's now back with me as my right-hand man, and he too is phenomenal. And this here is Enid. And Enid is one of our worship leaders at the church. And she's on the hit list. And she knows that because we're praying about it. Over the years, 500 young men and women have gone through this mentorship training. A good number of these now work in our church plants, in different mission organizations, in industry, in commerce, in government. And where are we going to find the leaders for the 300 churches we want to plant by the year 2020? These young leaders will plant those churches. On the Sunday we left to come over, we launched a church on that very Sunday. Next month, we're launching a church in a neighboring country. The month after that, we're launching a church in another neighboring country. Each team that's going into these countries has 5 people in it. All of them have come from this leadership development that is taking place at the Nairobi Chapel.
And our passion, our spirit. I first met Henry Cloud about 4 or 5 years ago now. And I met him because Bill Hybels said to me, after I had had the great opportunity to be interviewed by him here on this stage about a book I had written, he called me one day and he said, Carly, I'd like you to come up to South Haven in February, maybe it was January, really cold. I'd like you to come up and join me and a friend of mine, and we're going to mentor some pastors. Okay, this was not something I had done before. I didn't know Henry, but I said okay. So my husband Frank and I travel, and we sit, Bill and Henry and I, on 3 stools in front of 30 or 40 leaders. And we gather for a day. The first thing I noticed about Henry, I read about him and I went through some of his books, but the first thing I noticed about him while he was speaking to these leaders, because I was a chief executive and he was a psychologist, and made me a little suspicious maybe, and I noticed he was incredibly practical. He was incredibly wise, actually. He had a lot of common sense, and as you know perhaps from some of the comments I've made previously, I really value common sense because it isn't so common. He had it. And his advice to these pastors was steeped in experience, not in the laboratory, but in the real world. So I was impressed with that. Second thing that impressed me about Henry, he married science and faith in a wonderful way. I personally have never understood the conflict between science and faith. You know, I've listened to debates between scientists who say they don't believe in God, or people of faith who say they're suspicious of science. Personally, I don't understand that. The more I learn about science, the deeper my faith becomes, because it's such an incredible system that God has in place. And he married them up. He taught me a lot about how the human brain works and all the science that he knows and understands and I do not, but it fits so perfectly with what we believe and what we try and practice every day. He married science and faith and leadership development in such an interesting and provocative and helpful way. The third thing that impressed me about Henry is he actually was a lot of fun. He was fun, he was funny, he was easy to be around. But the most important thing about Henry, for me, is what Henry said to me in the middle of that cold day. And at that time, I was struggling with my own faith. And we were having a conversation. And it sounded, you know, like perhaps a kind of typical conversation between an executive and a guy with a doctorate. You know, it was very intellectual about faith. And we got about 20 minutes into that conversation. And I'll never forget this. Henry, with all his education and all his wisdom and all his advice and all his books, Henry looked at me and said, "You know, Carly, maybe it's just as simple as plugging in." And for me, that was exactly the right thing to hear at exactly the right time. So Henry will not always and not only influence how I think about leadership. He will not always and not only challenge my mind. Henry will also and always be in my heart. Please welcome Henry Cloud.
Thank you, Carly. Hey guys, has this been an incredible summit or what? The thing that has gotten me and just struck me is the energy. I mean, everything is just so high energy. And think of it, Bob Goff and Pat Lencioni back to back. I'm a doctor. They have medicine that it will fix that. You medicate it, you don't invite it, okay? Just, Bill said... But anyway, we have a tradition at Willow, and this is part of what I want all the rest of you in all the venues to see, because the Bible says in Philippians 2, verse 29, that when someone is led well in the church, that you should give them appropriate honor. So about 20 years ago, we started a little tradition around Willow. We do this around the staff when one of our cherished staff members moves on. We stand them up in front of everybody, and then we say kind words. I'm done with kind words. And then we invite everyone to say this little saying together. We say, "We hold you in high regard."
Just like the scripture says, that's what you ought to do with leaders. When they've done a good job, you should hold them in high regard. So we just go, we hold you in high regard, then we say, way to go, and then we clap like crazy and embarrass the heck out of them. And so, not at the venues now. I'm just wanting you to watch this. But this is important to our church and to Jimmy. So, will all of you, would you stand to your feet? You know how this goes. We say, we hold you in high regard, and then we go, way to go, and then you clap like crazy. 1, 2, 3. We hold you in high regard. Way to go. And thankfully Gary said yes. So Gary, will you come so that we can just welcome you as the new president of the WCA? And Gary's going to say a couple words here. So
You will stand here, it will take quite a few minutes. Okay, well, good enough. And you all stayed here to hear Andy. You didn't really stay here to hear me. So I'll try to make this only a few minutes, well, 10 or 11 to be exact. 11:43, I see. You know, when Bill asked me to become president of the WCA, I was very, very surprised because, as he just said, he knew I was planning to retire and hand over my responsibilities of leading international after this week. So I had Monday, I had totally different plans. Now I have totally different plans. I turned 70 this May, and my wife had organized a birthday party and a retirement party. And here I think you see a picture of my family here eventually with my children and grandchildren that came in from, oh there it is, a nice Bavarian theme. And I'm from Bavaria originally, as you can tell, Germany at least. And we had lederhosen on, and I wanted to come with my lederhosen today, but I don't think you could stand that, so I didn't put them on. So we had lederhosen and dirndl, and it was a wonderful Bavarian celebration. And so by that time I already had made a decision that I would take this position, and so it became a non-retirement party. So let me tell you how it all happened.
And has since grown to 5 different churches in the greater Atlanta area, totaling over 33,000 people every single weekend. And has also launched a global network of churches, reaching over 30 churches and impacting literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of leaders all over the world. If you haven't read Andy's latest book, Deep and Wide, it's a book that you have to read. If you're a leader, a pastor, or involved in the church world, this book will speak to you. I'm so thankful to Andy because he's been a great example to me as an incredible husband, as a great dad, and an awesome friend. I've benefited from his teaching. He's helped me be a better leader. He's helped me to be more effective in ministry. And he looks really, really good in a blue shirt. Would you please join me in welcoming my good friend, a great hero to the church, Pastor Andy Stanley.
So one day, Jesus is like way north of the city of Jerusalem, right outside of Caesarea Philippi. He's with his guys. And I don't know what they were talking about. Maybe they're talking about the city of Caesarea Philippi. It got renamed about the time that Jesus would have gotten his learner's license, which in the United States is around 15 years old. And so they're outside the city, and they're walking into the city, and it was renamed for Caesar Augustus on the day, the year that he had died. And then Jesus turns to his guys, and he asks them a question you should not ask your friends, because you may not like the answer. He says, Caesar Augustus, yeah, but who do people say I am? You should not try this, okay? What's the word on the street about me? Well, who do people say I am? And you know the answer. It's like, well, they all thought people think you're some reincarnated person, like an Old Testament prophet, or maybe even John the Baptist hasn't been gone that long, but he's back. You know, people have all kinds of theories about who you are, Jesus. And then Jesus said, remember what he said? He said, what about you guys? Who do you say that I am? Peter, I'd say raised his hand. I don't think Peter ever raised his hand to you. He just blurted it out. He said, I'll tell you who I think you are. I think you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. I think you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus turns to Peter specifically, and he said, you didn't come up with that answer on your own. That was given you from above. And on this rock, from now on, you're not just Peter. Now on this rock. And then he said something that I'm not really even sure how it made it out of the first century. I'm not even sure how it made it into written form. Because at the moment it must have seemed completely insignificant and irrelevant. And Jesus says, and on this rock, I'm going to build my congregation, my assembly, and death won't stop it. On this rock, and if you're Catholic, you think it's Peter, and that's fine. And if you're not Catholic, you don't think it's Peter, and that's fine too. I'll tell you why in a minute. But on this rock, I'm going to build a congregation, an assembly, and death, my death, and he would look at his gang and say, your death isn't going to stop it. And then they walked on in toward the city. And I don't know what went through their mind. Maybe they didn't even, barely paid attention. Matthew's over there trying to write everything down. And John, did you get that? I didn't get what was your version? I don't know how we got it. At the moment, it must have seemed so insignificant. And I'm going to build a gathering. I'm going to build a people. And you're like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 12 of us, including Judas. So yeah, you're going to have to kind of get this thing going. On this rock, I'm going to build a gathering. And nothing, not even my death, not even your death, is going to stop it.
8,000 people right here on the Willow campus, and then the rest in hundreds of venues all over America.
I remember the first time I ever met Pastor Bill. He said two things to me. He said, study the heart of listening, and I don't remember what else he said, but that first one was like, that's pretty cool.
God gave us an innate desire to love others, and if we have a job that has nothing of that in it, we can't love others.
We can't give people what we don't have. We cannot give help when we can't ask for it.
Just don't be afraid. Just be in the life worthy of the calling you receive.
I think one of the ways to make a group of human beings be very powerful as a leader is to constantly show them perpetual optimism. No matter how bad things are, we're going to fix it.
In business, see what we're doing in television and film, it's lots of no's. All I hear is NO, next opportunity. I do not let it drag me down.
You want to change the world? Learn how to change behavior.